Please be seated if you have a chair. My name is Lynn McDonald, Principal of Beerwah State High School. As one of the local principals, it is a privilege to act as MC on behalf of the Beerwah and District Sub-Branch. In relation to COVID, given we are assembling outside, there are no specific requirements. However, hand sanitiser is provided for your use. I would ask that all here take a moment to ensure mobile phones are switched off or onto silent to ensure that our service is not disrupted. Thank you. I would like to ask Jaren Grubner, Year 12 student from Beerwah State High School, to lead us in a welcome to country.
I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land on which we meet on today, the Gubbi Gubbi, Cubbi Cubbi people. I would also like to pay respects to the elders, past, present and emerging.
Apologies today have been received by Andrew Wallace, Federal Member for Fisher, who is attending another service, Jason Hunt, State Member for Caloundra, who has sent a wreath to be laid on his behalf, and Councillor Rick Babarowski, Sunshine Coast Council Division 1 and Deputy Mayor, who's travelling interstate. I extend a very warm welcome to our special guests, our Beerwah and District Sub-Branch President, John Nisbet, Treasurer Lee Christie, Secretary and Wellbeing Officer Libby Brown, and our returned servicemen who are lined up here in front of me. Also extend a warm welcome to Flight Lieutenant AAFC Australian Air Force Cadets David Bentley. Thank you to our community and our school children and our other school students who've come today to show your respects. On the morning of April 25th, 1915 at 4:28am, Australian and New Zealand troops landed under fire at Gallipoli, and it was then and in the campaign which followed that the ANZAC spirit and tradition was forged. The spirit behind that tradition has inspired and has become an enduring example for later generations of Australians to follow. Each year we pay homage not only to those original ANZACs but to all who fought, died or were disabled in their service to our country. They enriched our nation's history. Their hope was for the freedom of mankind, and we remember with pride their courage, their compassion and their comradeship. They served on land and sea and in the air and in many places throughout the world. Not only do we honour the memory of those Australians who have fallen in battle, we share the sorrow of those who have mourned them and of all who've been victims of armed conflict. Today we come together to remember. I now invite Beerwah and District Sub-Branch President John Nisbet to give his address.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. In the telling of the Anzac Day story, we understandably gravitate to what happened on the Gallipoli Peninsula on this day 106 years ago. For the last few years, we have rightly focused on the Great War and particularly the Western Front and the carnage, confusion and courage that our young nation troops were subject to or displayed. Arguably, though, our darkest year was not 106 years ago, but at 1942 challenged us more as a nation than any other. A year in which the Anzac story of dealing with adversity is borne out like few others. In the final days of 41, just 3 weeks into the Pacific War, Prime Minister John Curtin warned of the supreme test Australia would face in the year ahead. Evoking the poetry of Bernard O'Dowd, Curtin foreshadowed the arrival of war on Australian doorsteps and posited whether 1942 would bring either disaster or a new dawn. All Australia is at stake in this war, he declared. The year started with Britain facing its own darkest hour in the fight against Nazi Germany, just as Japan forces were sweeping across Asia, with Hong Kong and the Malay Peninsula falling quickly. Despite valiant Allied efforts, the resistance, but lacking the control of the sea and air, Singapore inevitably fell on 15th of February. At that moment, 15,000 Australians from the 8th Division were condemned as prisoners of war. Thousands more would die in captivity. The war as POWs was far from over, and it was to be a very different war from that they had expected. Just 2 days later, 22 Australian Army nurses were brutally massacred at Banker Island, having surrendered along with wounded servicemen and civilian evacuees from Singapore. It is hard for us today to understand the strategic shock that the fall of Singapore gave rise to, how it sapped morale and how it made Australians feel very alone. Just 4 days later, that point was driven home when 118 Japanese carrier-borne aircraft, many veterans of Pearl Harbor, bombed Darwin, devastating the town and leaving 243 people dead. Among the dead was the first American serviceman killed helping to defend Australia as US destroyer Beerwah was lost after sustaining a heavy air attack along with 88 of her crew. Despite great heroism, there were also less conspicuous acts in Darwin, as there always is in war. This was the first of a series of 85 attacks on the Australian mainland throughout 1942, which even included the wall coming to Sydney on the night of the 31st of May with the audacious Japanese midget submarine attack. Just over a week after Darwin was bombed, Australian morale was struck another blow when the cruiser HMAS Perth and USS Houston were sunk in a short but vicious and gallant battle in the Sudan Straits. Over 1,000 Australians and US sailors were lost that night. More than 350 crew members were from the HMAS Perth, including Captain Heckwalla, whose death was described in dispatches as a heavy deprivation for the young Navy of Australia. Many others were lost as POWs as the war went on. Days later there was another heroic loss when Lieutenant Commander Robert Rankin, in command only a few short weeks, turned his hopelessly outgunned sloop HMAS Yarra toward Japanese cruisers and destroyers in a vain attempt to allow the convoy the ship was protecting a chance to scatter. Sadly, the outcome was preordained. The stories of courage such as Rankin's and leading seaman Buck Taylor's, who continued to fire until the end, were not, while the bulk of the RAAF was heavily engaged in the European theatre. Our Hudson bombers based in Darwin from 2 and 13 squadrons continued their dangerous missions over Timor, having already operated out of bases in the Dutch East Indies since late 41 and in early 42. They attacked shipping and bombed Japanese targets in treacherous skies they did not control. Against this background, with the Australian spirits sagging in, the Japanese started to expand their defensive perimeter further into the Southwest Pacific, and the threat of cutting the lines of the Southwest Pacific and communication between Australia and the United States became very real. Forewarned by intelligence the impending Japanese operations, Allied forces deployed the Yorktown and Lexington carrier came task forces just north-east of Australia. 2 Australian ships, the heavy cruiser HMAS Australia and light cruiser HMAS Hobart, contributed to the Allied force. As a testament to the gravity of the situation and what Australia had to lose, the Prime Minister rose in Parliament and announced that a great naval battle was proceeding in the Southeast West Pacific zone. It may be for many of them the last full measure of their devotion to accomplish the increased safety and security of this territory, he warned. From that moment on, the significance of the Battle of the Coral Sea was cemented in Australia's history. I think it's gone on long enough. I think I'll cut this a little bit short. Where are we? Yeah, okay. The thread that connects our troops to Gallipoli, to those of 42 and to those standing watch today is the grit, the determination and the will to endure the adversity they face in fighting for our way of life and our freedom. The fight was always involved great sacrifice and we have not always prevailed, but our troops have always fought in a way that warrants our gratitude, our respect, and most importantly, thoughtful reflection. That is why we gather here every year from dawn throughout the day. That is why we must remember them always. You'll allow me to draw your attention to this merry little band here at the front. They are friends of you all. They are family. They are parents. They are neighbours. Every year we do this. Nobody ever mentions the veterans. So this year I've decided to. The word veteran is mentions someone that has not retired, has not left life. You can't be X until it's over. You're always a veteran. All right. When a veteran leaves the job and retires to a better life, many are jealous. Some are pleased, and others who may have retired wonder if he knows what he's leaving behind, because we already know. For example, that after a lifetime of camaraderie that few experience, it will remain a longing for the past times we know in the military life. There is a fellowship which lasts long after the uniforms are hung up in the back of the closet. We know that even if he throws them away, they will be on him with every step and breath that remains in his life. We also know the very bearing of the man speaks of what he was and in his heart still is. These are the burdens of the job. You will still look at people suspiciously, still see what others do not see or choose to ignore, and will always look at what the rest of the military world with respect for what they do. Never think of for a moment you are escaping that life. You are only escaping from the job and only being allowed to leave active duty. So never forget for one moment you are still a member of the greatest fraternity the world has ever known. You see, a veteran, whether on active service, retired, served one hitch, or reserve, is someone who, at one point in their life, wrote a cheque made payable to the Commonwealth of Australia and its citizens for an amount of up to and including my life. So from one veteran to another, it is an honour to be in your company. Thank you for your service, lest we forget.
Thank you, John. Please be seated. We will now hear from Beerwah State School Captains Kaylee Christie and School Vice Captain Serenity Bailey, who will read the poem Sir.
So, sir, would it help if I shed a tear? I swear it's my first time since this time last year. My spine is a tingle, my throat is all dry, as I stand to attention for all those who died.
I watch the flag dancing halfway down the pole. That damn bugle player sends chills to my soul. I feel the pride and the sorrow. There's nothing the same as standing to attention on ANZAC Day.
So, sir, on behalf of the young and free, will you take a message when you finally do leave? To your mates that are lying from Tobruk to the Somme, the legends of your bravery will always live on.
I've welcomed Olympians back to our shore. I've cheered baggy green caps and watched Wallabies score. But when I watch you marching, sir, in that parade, I know these are the memories that will never fade.
So, sir, on behalf of the young and free, will you take a message when you finally do leave? It's the least we can do, sir, to repay the debt. We will always remember you, lest we forget.
Thank you, Kaylee and Serenity. We will now hear from Peachester State School Captains Alexandra Haslam and Brooklyn Hamill with the poem Sonnet for ANZAC Day.
Sound the last post again, lest we forget. The freedom that we cherish has been bought, not like mushrooms in the field. The debt is ours to pay, mindful of those who fought and fell, yet they still held the torch aloft. May we remain as zealous to withstand the traitors who would make our fibres soft, as well as the enemies beyond the land.
The trumpet has the power to move us still, and though the debris of flood of years lies overhand and mine An aching thrill comes rising perilously close to tears. Sound the last post to hold the memory bright, then sound the rouse and keep the torch alight.
Thank you, Alexandra and Brooklyn. We will now hear from Beerwah State High School captains Kirby Payton and Hayley Ely with the poem The Australian.
The bravest thing God ever made, a British officer's opinion. The skies that arch his land were blue, his bush-born winds were warm and sweet, and yet from earliest hours he knew the tides of victory and defeat. From fierce floods thundering at his birth, from red droughts raving while he played, he learned no fear, no foes on earth, the bravest thing God ever made.
The bugles of the motherland rang ceaselessly across the sea, to call him and his lean brown band to shape imperial destiny. He went by youth's grave purpose willed, the goal unknown, the coast unweighed, the promise of his blood fulfilled, the bravest thing God ever made.
We know it's our deathless pride, the splendour of his first year blow. How reckless, glorious, undenied, he stormed those steel-lined cliffs we know. And no one who saw him scale the height behind his reeking burnet blade would rob him of his title right, the bravest thing God ever made.
Bravest were half a world of men, are brave beyond all earth's rewards. So stoutly none shall charge again, till the last breaking of the swords. Wounded or hale, one home from war, or yonder by the lone pine laid, give him his due evermore, the bravest thing God ever made.
Thank you, Kirby and Hayley. The combined bands from Glasshouse Christian College and Beerwah State High School will now lead us in the hymn Abide With Me. This is conducted by Miss Ebony Hilton and sung by Madeline Mullins and Emily Sharvey. Beautiful hymn. I would like to introduce our guest speaker and invite to the podium to give his address Flight Lieutenant Australian Air Force Cadets David Bentley.
Good morning, distinguished guests, veterans, ladies and gentlemen, young people everywhere. As we all know, ANZAC Day originated as a remembrance of the Australian and New Zealand sacrifice in World War I. In the more than 100 years since Gallipoli, the role of the digger has been rightly memorialised and embedded into our national identity, yet the service and sacrifice of the air forces of our two countries through World War I and numerous conflicts and peacekeeping missions is often overlooked or even unknown. This year the Royal Australian Air Force celebrated its 100th anniversary. The Royal New Zealand Air Force is 87th. The organisation I'm representing today, the Australian Air Force Cadets, previously known as the Royal Australian Air Force Air Training Corps, its 80th. And that's why I'd like to pay a little bit of attention today to the Air Forces and the airmen and women who served. During World War II, Royal Australian Air Force and Royal New Zealand Air Force personnel served in the Battle of Britain, the Battle of the Atlantic, in Italy, North Africa, the Pacific and many other locations. But it was an RAF Bomber Command that they offered their greatest sacrifice. 80 years ago, Europe was under Nazi domination. Russia had been invaded and was on the brink of defeat. And in the absence of any other means of slowing or reversing this seemingly unstoppable tragedy, RAF Bomber Command began preparing for a sustained air war against Nazi Germany. At the time, Bomber Command was relatively small, but eventually more than 125,000 young men from all across the Commonwealth and the occupied countries, all volunteers, mostly aged in their teens or early 20s, would serve as aircrew. Many more would work tirelessly day and night to maintain, repair and supply the aircraft and support their crews. While the role of aircrew appears sometimes in the public mind a bit glamorous, there was a lethal cost to wearing aircrew wings. Night after night for 3 long years, pilots, flight engineers, navigators, bomb aimers, wireless operators and gunners, some as young as 19 and in fact one recorded as young as 16 who lied about his age, would climb into these large, deafeningly loud, uncomfortable aircraft and endure flights of up to 10 hours in freezing temperatures over hostile territory, knowing that their chances of surviving a tour of 30 operations was only around 1 in 4. If they were lucky enough to survive anti-aircraft fire, fighter attacks or collisions in the dark over the target, because they flew at night, they knew they would likely have to go back the next night and do it all again. It's little known that no other military arm approached the possibility of death faced by the aircrew in Bomber Command. The horrific infantry casualty rate in World War I is generally cited as around 20%. However, of the 125,000 aircrew of all nations in Bomber Command, 55,573 were killed. This represents a 44% casualty rate, approaching 1 in 2. Imagine the person sitting next to you all around this ground went suddenly missing. More than 10% of all losses were borne by our 2 young nations. Of the 55,573 who were killed serving on operations in Bomber Command, 3,486 were Australians and 1,073 were New Zealanders. Over the years, some have questioned the value of the air war over Europe with all its complications, limitations and tragic consequences, but war is horror. No sane person wants war. But when it comes, as it did in 1939, the only response is to act vigorously with all the resources at hand and bring it to an end as quickly as possible. When Bomber Command began the air campaign over Europe, there was simply no other way of acting to curtail Nazi Germany's aggression. Left unchecked, the world would be a very, very different one from what we enjoy today. On the effect of the air campaign, Hitler's Minister for Armaments, Albert Speer, said after the war, the real importance of the air war consisted in the fact that it opened a second front, long before the invasion in Europe. No one has yet seen this was the greatest battle lost on the German side. The air campaign over Europe severely degraded Germany's ability to continue the war, and in doing so saved countless Allied lives. Yet it remains a lasting injustice that there has never been a medal struck commemorating the sacrifice of Bomber Command, nor was there until 2012 even a fitting memorial to these young men. When it was finally constructed, it had to be funded by public donations. The memorial is located in Green Park in London, and I would encourage you to see it if you can. I did about 18 months ago, and it was an extremely moving experience. So this morning, so many decades later, in salute to the 125,000 young men of RAF Bomber Command, British, Australians, New Zealanders, Canadians, French, Czech, Polish, South Africans and the many other nationalities who stepped into the breach as volunteers at an extremely bleak time in human history. To the thousands who survived but brought back unseen wounds they endured for the rest of their lives. But most especially to the 55,573 sons, brothers, uncles, nephews, cousins and friends who laid down their lives in the cold, hostile skies over Europe to help bring to an end the bloodiest conflict in human history, and who now lie in a quiet corner of a foreign field so far away. I say lest we forget. Thank you.
Thank you for your words, David. Please welcome Beerwah State High School and Beerwah State Primary School Chaplain Mike Turner to the podium, who will lead us in prayer.
Let's pray. Dear God, thank you so much for today. Thank you that we can pause and remember those who have cared enough to go into harm's way to protect us and many others all around the world. We want to always remember them. Please protect all the men and women currently serving in our Navy, Air Force and Army, and watch over all their families when they're away from home. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Chappie Mike. You are now all invited to come forward and lay a wreath accompanied by the lament Flowers of the Forest. As I call names, please lay your wreath. RSL Beerwah and District President John Nisbet. Pre-Federation inclusive of Chinese Boxer Rebellion, Sudanese conflict and both Boxer Rebellions. Adrian Dunbaven. World War I, Lee Christie. World War II, Andrew Loxton. Phil Hawkins. Malay-Indo conflicts, Sharon Walters. Vietnam, John Ruhan. Peacekeepers, peacemakers and humanitarian missions, inclusive of Gulf War I and II, Afghanistan, East Timor, Timor-Leste, UN Peacekeepers Missions 179 to date, David Early. Navy, Bob Moss. Army and ex-service women, Neville and Liz Late. Air Force, Glenn Walters. War animals with over 9 million losses in World War I, Robert Harvey. Animals are inclusive of cats dating back to Napoleonic days to keep rats and mice off the ship, pigeon, hawks and other species as messenger birds, budgies, canaries in tunnels, mines to warn of gas, dogs as companions and explosive devices, and many unit mascot animals. In honour of Australian Army 2nd 19th Battalion, Marto Robbie. Defence Padre Chaplains, Mike Turner. Max Cashin. Legacy, Lorraine Shaw. Jason Hunt, MP, sends his apologies but has a wreath to be laid by the Beerwah State High School captains. I would ask the school students to assemble near the wreaths. Beerwah State School, Kaylee Christie and Serenity Bailey. Peachester State School captains Alexandra Haslam and Brooklyn Hamill. Glasshouse Christian College Prep to Year 12, Chelsea Ann Johnson and Tate Denethi. Beerwah State High School captains Kiana Brooks and Cappy Osborne. I invite the others from Glasshouse Christian College to come forward to lay their wreaths. Scouts and Cubs, Sarah and Nicholas. Lions, Beerwah, Alistair Waddell. From the Queensland Police Service, Senior Sergeant Brendan Davis. Helicopter Flight Vietnam, Leo Petrie. For Athol McKinnon. I now invite anyone else in the audience who would like to lay a wreath to come forward. Thank you all. The last post is one of a number of bugle calls in military tradition that marks the phases of the day. While the reveille signals the start of a soldier's day, the last post signals its end. The call is believed to have originally been part of a more elaborate routine known in the British Army as tattoo that began in the 17th century. For those who are able, could you please stand for the last post, the ode, the minute silence and the reveille. The last post will be played by bugler Jason Ninehoff. Please bow your heads during the last post and the minute silence. Reveille mark the start of the day, so raise your heads as if looking to see the sun rising. The ode will be read by President Beerwah and District Sub-Branch John Nisbet, who I invite to the podium.
shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget.
Please be seated. We will now hear from Max Cashin's mother, Tanya Cashin, who is reading a poem about ANZAC Day.
I saw a kid marching with medals on his chest. He marched alongside diggers, marching 6 abreast. He knew that it was ANZAC Day, he walked along with pride. He did his best to keep in step with diggers by his side. And when the march was over, the kid was rather tired. The diggers said, "Whose medals, son?" To which the kid replied, "They belong to my daddy, but he didn't make it back. He died up in New Guinea on a lonely jungle track." The kid looked rather sad then, and a tear come down his eye. The digger said, "Don't cry, my son, I will tell you why. Your daddy marched alongside with us today, all the blooming way. The diggers know that he did. He was here. It's just like that on ANZAC Day." The kid looked rather puzzled and didn't understand, but the digger went on talking and started to wave his hand. "For this great land we live in, there is a price to pay. For we all love fun and merriment in this country where we live, and the price was that some soldier a precious life he must give. For you to go to school, my lad, and worship God at will, someone had to pay the price, so the diggers paid the bill. Your daddy died for us, my son, for all things good and true. I wonder if you understand these things I've said to you." The kid looked up at the digger for just a little while, and with a changed expression, said with a lovely smile, "I know my dad marched here today, on this ANZAC Day. I know he did, all the blooming way."
Thank you, Tanya. We will now hear from Glasshouse Christian College captains Chelsea and Johnson and Tate Donathy with the poem "We Are All Australians Now."
Australia takes her pen in hand to write a line to you, to let you fellows understand how proud we are of you. For sharing shed and cattle run from Broome to Hobson Bay, each native-born Australian son stands straighter up today.
The man who used to hump his drum on far-out Queensland runs is fighting side by side with some Tasmanian farmers' sons. The fisher boys drop sail and oar to grimly stand the test, along that storm-swept Turkish shore with miners from the west.
The old state jealousy of yore are dead as prominence shows. We're not state children anymore, we're all Australians today. our six-starred flag that used to fly half shyly to the breeze, unknown where elder nations ply their trade on foreign seas.
Flies out to meet the morning blue with victory at the prow, for that's the flag that Sydney flew. The wide seas know it now. The metal that a race can show is proved with shot and steel, and now we know what nations know and feel what nations feel.
The honoured graves beneath the crest of Gabba Teepee Hill may hold our braves and our best, but we have brave men still. With all our petty quarrels down, dissensions overthrown, we have through what you boys have done, a history of our own.
Our old world differences are dead, like weeds beneath the plough. For English, Scotch and Irish bred, they're all Australians now. So we'll toast the 3rd Brigade that led Australia's van, for never shall their glory fade in minds Australian.
Fight on, unflinchly, till right and justice reign. Fight on, till victory shall send you home again. And with Australians' flag shall fly a spray of water bra to symbolise our unity, we're all Australia now.
Thank you, Chelsea and Tate. Please be upstanding for the national anthems, New Zealand, God Defend New Zealand, and Australia, Advance Australia Fair, conducted by Ebony Hilton and sung beautifully by Madeline Mullins and Emily Sharvey. Remembering the second line has had a change in wording of Advance Australia Fair, and the protocol from New Zealand is that the anthem be sung, played in Maori and English.
Australians, oh let us rejoice, for we are young and free, with golden soil and well fertile. Our home is girt by sea, our land abounds in nature's gifts, of beauty rich and rare. In history's age, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains and let us sing, advance Australia
Thank you. You may be seated. I now call upon Guard Commander to dismount the Catafalque Party. After they have dismounted, I would like us all to show our thanks for their dedication to our service today. Thank you. I call upon Beerwah District Sub-Branch President Mr John Nisbet for his closing remarks.
Well, I want to thank the Catafalque Party. They were great, weren't they? They're from 223 Squadron in Caloundra. I want to thank Colonel Michael Hughes, LCDT Leo Hayes, LCDT Luke Chen, and LCDT Justin Cowell. I'd like to thank all the parents that turned up here today with their children and all the students who came with their head teachers. Thank you all for coming once again. It's always a pleasure to see you here. I'd like to thank our musicians. It's the first time we've had a band that big. That was well done. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Miss Jenny Broderick. She organises all of the technical gear here and her offsiders. Yeah, they do a great job every year. We've had donations from Tim at Buck's Bakery. He's a great fella. Support him all you can. He's a man among men. Lions ladies, I cannot do anything without these people. They're fabulous. You've only got to tell them you're doing something and they want to race in and give you a hand. Thank you everybody. Our parks workers that mowed all this and made it nice and clean for everybody. I want to thank them very much. They were great. They do a good job every year for us. Our Sunshine Coast Council, we received a grant for them for $2,000 towards traffic control. That was very, very nice, and that's great. Thank you. I've got a few here. I've got Barry's Butchery, Woolworths, Woodlands, and Banjos. All contributions and donations from them. They're fabulous people. Our what is it? When you get to my age, you lose words. The community here is fabulous. All of the shops and everything, they look after us real well. You people, I cannot say enough about you people. You support us real well with our bad sales, with our raffles and things like that. I don't know. You do great things for us, and I want to thank you very much. I want to thank Rotary for their help in serving breakfast for our tireless workers here this morning, the scouts and everybody that was there. We had to feed them, and I think they did all right there. All right. Yeah. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you again next year. I want to thank my veterans. They always do a good job. And yeah, I'll see you all again next year. Thank you.
I would like to add a big thank you to John Nisbet, Treasurer Lee Christie and Secretary Wellbeing Officer Libby Brown for planning and hosting this event. Libby works tirelessly behind the scenes with her group of people to organise guests, licences to run the event, plan the script, organise wreaths and do advertising. Thank you to all. Very well done. This concludes our service, but could I ask you just to remain for a minute? I now invite all to morning tea under the marquee. Please observe COVID social distancing rules. Thank you all for attending today. That concludes